Hi, I'm Chibi Fangirl. Okay, I know what you're thinking. When is the next episode coming out? Due to its massive length, it'll be coming out later than the bi-weekly process like I did with Adrian's Return. So in the meantime, I'll be doing a short episode based off something completely different. You see, finals are coming up, and this semester we had to read a separate piece. Let's just say I didn't like it. At all. So instead of writing an essay like I was supposed to, I decided to do a review instead. I wrote the essay. I'm just doing this as a bonus. Okay, so how did this series work? Well, unlike the fanfiction series like you're used to, I will not be reading the passages of the story. So instead, I'll be comparing literature which I consider not very good writing compared to something else in the media which told a similar story, but better. Similar to Critical Kid books versus film series, except the film or series will be under a different title, but a similar story. Now, if you hate spoilers, I wouldn't recommend watching this series because this series has a lot of spoilers. So if you don't plan on reading the book, and if you don't plan on watching the series I'm about to compare it to, then feel free to watch me suffer and rant about how terrible this book was. So since I'm in a different show, maybe I should have a new look. Maybe something a little more, sophisticated. Ah, that's better. For those who have read a separate piece, let's do a recap of what the story's about. Our story takes place in New Hampshire during World War II, and takes place at a boarding school, which I guess is an all-boys school called Devon. We meet our protagonist Gene, who has no personality whatsoever. It's 15 years after he attended Devon, and he's came to visit it, which is now a museum. The whole story is a flashback of Gene's experience at Devon. Even as a kid, Gene had no personality. That is, until he met Phineas, a peppy, upbeat boy who didn't have a care in the world. Phineas makes Gene do all crazy things for him, such as jumping out of trees and skipping school so they can go to the beach. One day, after jumping out of a tree, Phineas breaks his leg. Devon is mostly sports and education based, so Phineas is a little out of place since you need your leg to do almost any sport. So he goes to the hospital, and Gene feels somewhat responsible for Phineas's injury. However, Gene goes to visit Phineas to apologize to him, but Phineas tells him it wasn't his fault, and somehow they get into an argument. School's out for a while, and it comes back into session, and Phineas isn't at school for a while. And this makes Gene actually somewhat sad. The other kids at school speculate what could have happened. Most of them think that Gene pushed him. Phineas, however, does come back. However, now he's walking on crutches, and it prevents him from doing a lot with all the energy he has. However, Phineas does recover from his injury and creates a game called Blitzball, which makes absolutely no sense. But Phineas doesn't care, even if Gene points it out to him. One of the main events of the story is the war going on. It's not brought up until chapter 8 since it's a boarding school and they have to make some cutbacks, one of them being the maid service. Phineas isn't happy about this and doesn't believe there is a war going on, at least that's what everyone thinks, including the readers. It wasn't until the mock trial near the end where Gene is accused of breaking Phineas's leg and Phineas runs out of the room, falling down the stairs and breaking his leg yet again. Phineas is sent to the hospital where he tells Gene he wanted to join the army just so he can protect everyone and have no worries since everyone at Devon is scared and confused. The next day, Gene comes to visit Phineas. However, the doctors say he is dead because some of the bone marrow in his leg went to his heart and stopped it from beating. Okay, I know I'm not no doctor, but I'm pretty sure your leg can't affect something in your heart unless it's like a flesh-eating bacteria. Gene then returns to Devon, which is now holding some of the soldiers, and everyone's concerned about Phineas, but they are too naive to understand what really happened to him. Gene and some minor characters also enlist in the military, and that's how the story ends. Now, what could possibly relate to this story? Well, it's a slice-of-life anime called Shuffle. Now, those who are unfamiliar with anime, in Japan there's a genre that we don't have in the United States called slice of life. In the States, we just consider this a subgenre of adventure. What Slice of Life is a series that with no major story instead focuses on life in general, thus calling it the Slice of Life. Animes that fall into this category are Lucky Star, Rosary Plus Vampire, Clannad, and Ranma 1/2, and many, many others. However, the one I would like to talk about is Shuffle, which is not only a Slice of Life anime, but it's also a harem. Okay, I know what you're thinking. How does a story like a separate piece is similar to Shuffle in any way? Clearly there are no girls mentioned in the entire story, and you don't see any boys fawning over other boys either. So how can I possibly compare these two? One word, structure. In the harem genre, it's mostly targeted to older boys around 16+. There are also something called reverse harems, which are targeted towards females, but we'll be focusing on the male demographic for today. I am familiar with the harem series targeted towards boys since I have seen a good chunk of them. And most of them are the same structure. Okay, except for Ranma. That's a totally different story. The harem structure features a boy with no personality, in this case Rin Tsuchimi, until he runs into the female lead, or leads, which eventually gives him character as time progresses. In Rin's harem, there is his roommate Kaide, his childhood friend Asa, upbeat angel Sia, shy demon Narine, and too young to be jailbait Primula. While the one character gives him personality, the whole cast of leading ladies make him a more interesting character despite his previous lacking in personality. Now, I'm not comparing Separate Piece as a whole, but just the characters, because the plot has very little similarities. Earlier in the episode, I said that Gene had no personality till he meets Phineas, but even after he meets Phineas, he still doesn't seem really like a redeemable character. Well, nor does he seem very interesting. Honestly, if Gene wasn't the main character, I would have liked the story a little bit more. Maybe through a minor character perspective, because I know Phineas changed the personalities of other characters and not just Gene. Now, the reason why I say Gene has no personality even after we meet Phineas is because not once, at least in my memory, does Gene say he enjoyed something, liked something, or hated something. With Rin, we clearly notice some changes in emotion. Gene barely shows any emotion throughout the whole story except for certain parts such as the guilt of Phineas' broken leg, the anger at Phineas' personality, or the somber tone at the end. So let's go back to Rin. Unlike Gene, he has made a massive change. Rin has seen plain until he meets all the female characters which are introduced. Rin was going through all sorts of adventures such as lingerie shopping, going on dates, even getting stranded on an island with one of the female characters. We see changes of heart in him, so how come Gene shows so little? There is a climaxes shuffle despite it having a little of a plot. Rin has decided Asa to be his girlfriend, and his roommate Kaide, who has lived with him for years, has felt shut out and attempts to kill Asa. Rin comes in to step in, and Asa has some kind of a heart attack, and we find out that Asa is a half-breed. Asa doesn't have a really good relationship with her mother, who is trying to heal her with magic, but Asa doesn't want magic to save her. This could possibly risk her life. In the end, she escapes the hospital she was kept in for the last 2 episodes. Rin finds her at the same place he confesses his love to her. Asa says she feels better since she's at this place. Because, science!
Of course! Don't you know anything about science?
But logic aside, Rin tells Asa that she should use her magic and he doesn't want to see her dead. Asa refuses and Rin goes through such a great length that he's willing to cut off his own arm. Ew. He cuts it so bad that he's dying. Asa refuses to see him die and uses her magic to save both of them. And they live happily ever after together and go back to their happy-go-lucky routine. I'm not saying a happy ending is better than a sad one. Far from it. There is a lot of tragic endings that did a beautiful job. However, Gene was never a very likable character as Rin progressed. You may be asking why I chose Shuffle and not just any harem anime in general. Personally, Shuffle is my favorite out of the genre because it stands out amongst the others. Rosary plus Vampire was stupid to begin with and stupid to end with. There was really nothing to compare it to because even Separate Piece looks better than this series. There's also Clannad, which is very close to Shuffle, but is more slow-moving and is not as entertaining as Shuffle. There's also Negima, which can't be compared either since it has somewhat of a plot while still being a slice of life. So, what did we learn, kids? It's okay to make a bland character. That's normal human nature. But if you want to make an interesting character, you have to add the character's emotions and then get more of a climax. Separate Piece's climax would have done better if Gene had at least cried at Phineas' death, but he says he was too macho to cry. His lack of emotion makes him less human than an anime character. I repeat, an anime character. You can find Separate Piece in the whole Shuffle Season 1 on Amazon. Okay, teacher, how did I do? Yay! Aww. I'm Chibi Fangirl. I fangirl over to you, just listen. Now, if you excuse me, I have a 2-page essay to write. You're just mean.